What's up, girls? I just read Slouching Towards Bethlehem by Joan Didion. This is my second read by Joan Didion. The first one was Play It As It Lays, which is a short fiction novel or novella. And Slouching Towards Bethlehem is first a collection of articles that she's written in the late 60s, and then some journals she's written in the late 60s, and then some notes on, I guess, different geographic places, called 7 Places of the Mind. Slouching Towards Bethlehem is taken from the W.B. Yeats poem, which is pretty interesting because I've watched this famous Charlie Rose interview of Joan Didion, where she talks about how she learned to write, and she says that she learned to write by taking Hemingway novels and rewriting the stories line by line, trying to figure out what technical, what the function of each sentence was, basically. And so I find it interesting that Slouching Towards Bethlehem is borrowed from a poem, where For Whom the Bell Tolls is also, I believe, borrowed from a 1600s poem by Hemingway, and that's probably his most famous novel. The word that comes to mind when I think of this book is probably nostalgia. First, she's going through all of these different articles that she's written in the late 60s, and they kind of, she is a very sparse prose writer, and she never really inserts her opinions into her article entries, but from what she chooses, from what factual instances or observations she chooses to insert into the story, you do get her perspective, I would say. And so it's interesting, the 5 stories she has in there. She has this famous kind of murder case between a husband and wife. She has Slouching Towards Bethlehem itself is her going around the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco during the hippie movement, and the hippie movement is supposed to stand for this great declaration of freedom against pre-existing power structures, etc. But what she records is just kind of drug abuse, teenagers living on the street, kind of having a notion that they're serving some greater purpose, but whenever she questions any of them about what that is, they don't really know. And she connects all of these seemingly unrelated, or they're related, but seemingly, non-narrative things that happen throughout this story, and then orders them in such a way that she creates a narrative structure, which is really interesting. There is a climax to Slouching Towards Bethlehem at the very end, just in the way she orders the stories. So it's very fascinating. And I think, the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s ushers in this very extreme, chaotic culture that we kind of tend to romanticize in hindsight. At least I do. But I think reading these stories, you get the sense for kind of the dark side of all of that chaos that was going on. And these unrelated articles, reading them in order gives you, kind of this aesthetic idea of what the 70s were like, and it's a fascinating time. Her journal entries are kind of writerly journal entries. One's on morality, one is on self-respect, one is on keeping a journal. They're cool, I, as a writer, have thought about the intention, like the purpose of the practice of keeping a journal, because so many famous writers keep journals. Um, but if you're a reader who's never like really tried to figure out like, you know, what am I actually like gaining in keeping a journal? Like, what is the point? At first, it seems kind of obvious that it would be to record your life, and then she, dispels that notion by kind of divulging all this like going into like how subjective her memory is, and how she doesn't remember things the same as she wrote them. Other people don't remember them the same, and I kind of get the takeaway that it's more to keep track of feelings that she felt over things that happened. I really loved that one. And then the last 7 short stories or articles that are in there are all about places. Sacramento, Los Angeles, New York, Hawaii. It's interesting because like in the first section, I was feeling all of this nostalgia for the late 60s and 70s, and then she in real time within the late 60s and 70s is feeling nostalgia for her childhood idea of Sacramento, which is pretty interesting. It's kind of that thing from like Midnight in Paris by Woody Allen or whatever, that you're always kind of nostalgic for the era before you. You look at the past through this romantic lens. And she was talking about how much California has changed throughout her lifetime, and how people that come to California, and Sacramento specifically, will never experience like the real Sacramento or California. And it's funny because like grew up in Los Angeles, and I'm 27, she's 28 when she's writing a lot of this, and like I have that notion of Los Angeles myself. Maybe not to as severe, like maybe it's not as extreme as hers is, because I think she maybe experienced more physical change when like, the city of Sacramento kind of transitioned from being really agricultural based to a little more industrial loaded and became like a proper city. But I think everyone has that experience with where they grew up and it changing over time, and like kind of finding it like a little unnerving to reconcile how much a place can change through the course of your life, and then also, the like difficulty to communicate to other people what a place was like in a different time. That's kind of a lot of what this writing is, honestly. Is like, I feel like she's trying to communicate what certain places were like at a certain period of time, which is pretty cool. She's got a really great prose style. I don't know if I was like, it definitely reminds me of Hemingway. I don't know if I was just projecting that on because I've seen an interview where she talks about learning to write by rewriting Hemingway stories. She has like a lot of restraint, a lot of precision. I really love restraint. I think that's become like a very popular aesthetic in fiction, especially like women's literary fiction for whatever reason. Like Sally Rooney uses restraint really well, I think, in fiction to create this tension of like unspoken things in romantic relationships, like in normal people. Which I love. I think that's like the best use of restraint I've ever seen. In this articled form, that Joan Didion writes in, the restraint is almost used so that she's not imposing her opinion, but you do get her opinion by the end of the reading. I don't know if that makes sense. But anyway, Slouching Towards Bethlehem, Joan Didion. Check it out.